Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for August 5th, 2019. We'll begin with the appeals calendar. New cases, item number 1, 2019-89A, 36 West 66th Street, Manhattan. Do I call them together?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Item number 2, 2019-94A, 36 West 66th Street also.
Okay, and Commissioner
I
Ogren?
must recuse.
Okay. Okay. I just want to add that we had some very late submissions on Friday, reply submissions, so I'm not sure if everyone saw them because they came in late on Friday, so that's from the appellants. Okay, we have proof of service of initial application to owner, DOB, and city planning. The questions before us ultimately have to do with the split lot rules of Article 7, Chapter 7, and how these are read in conjunction with the bulk provisions for tower coverage and bulk distribution in the Special Lincoln Square District, Sections 8234 and 8236. In order to try to understand this, I always find the split lot rules quite confusing, so I went through them systematically. 7701 applies to all lots divided by district boundaries with respect to bulk regulations. 7702 states that where a zoning lot is divided by district boundaries but did not exist as of December 61 or where applicable when the split lot boundaries were created, quote, each portion of such zoning lot shall be regulated by all the provisions applicable to the district in which such portion of the zoning lot is located. There are two exceptions not relevant here where the pre-existing condition isn't relevant. Section 77-20, bulk regulations for split lots. So there is actually a provision that has to do with towers that would have applied had this been a pre-existing zoning lot, but it applies as an option. It's not a requirement, but it does clarify what the City Planning Commission had in mind when you've got a pre-existing lot, and the concept that the tower, that all the tower regulations sort of get distributed throughout the pre-existing zoning lot. But that's not the case here. This is a newly formed zoning lot with recent merger with adjoining properties. So where the zoning lot is not pre-existing, the only option is to treat the zoning lot on each side of the division separately, unless the regulation on both sides of the division is the same, as was made clear in the case of Beekman Hill, which was decided in 2000. It's a very important case to read for all the commissioners because it goes kind of systematically through almost every imaginable provision. Because in that case, the appellants were arguing that if you have one difference in the bulk regulations or the use regulations, that's enough to require that you treat both sides of the zoning lot, of the split lot separately. But in that case, the court said, no, when you have identical provisions, then you can treat it as if there is no subdivision of the lot. So the subject zoning lot is partly in an R8 and partly in a C47. The Lincoln Square District does not have special rules for lot coverage in the R8. However, towers are permitted in an R8 where they contain community facility uses, that's section 24-54. Since this building contains community facility use, I just would like the property owner actually to respond to whether 2454 is implicated here, since you do have some community facility, and that 2454A has similar tower coverage requirements to 8236. The appellants disagree with the owner and DOB about section 82-34. They actually agree that 82-36 applies to separate sides of the zoning lot. 8234 states plainly that the bulk distribution rules apply to any zoning lot with, quote, within the special district, requiring, quote, at least 60% of the total floor area permitted on a zoning lot to be located below 150 feet above curb level. This bulk distribution language in 8234 is nearly identical to that of section 23-651, tower on a base. I note that owners kind of insist that the two provisions are very different, but if you compare the language is almost identical, and you track it along, and it's clear that for whatever reason, it didn't just say in the special district, the tower coverage regulations in Article 2, Chapter 2 apply. It made them special to this district because there were slight modifications. So on a very large zoning lot in this, there's only a 2-block area in this special district that's an R8, where height factor and sky exposure plane regulations apply. But they also, as was actually pointed out by the owner, there is a tower provision for community facilities, so towers can be built in an R8 if they contain community facilities. So I have to assume, since I don't have a diagram to prove it impossible, that even without a tower, 60% of the total floor area on the large R8 zoning lot would fit within the envelope that limits street wall heights to 85 feet, and which must fall within the applicable sky exposure plane. So, in terms of this conversation about absurd results, if the bulk packing, as I say, bulk distribution rules actually apply to any lot anywhere in this special district, and you're talking about a height factor building, then you should be able to design a height factor building where you pack below the 150 feet. So I don't know whether you can even build a height factor building that's higher than 150 feet unless you have an enormous zoning lot. And so maybe that's one of the tests, because appellants are arguing that it's an absurd provision. It's absurd if you can't use it at all for height factor buildings. It's not absurd if it's a community facility building, but then that should have been something that city planning kind of pointed out, that except that for community facilities, this bulk distribution rule would apply in every district, for example. Although the zoning lot is divided by district boundaries, the bulk regulations as to distribution are the same on both sides of the lot. That's the way the language is reading. So according to that, the split block rules would be ineffective in the same way as would be the case if the floor area ratio on both sides of a split lot were the same. Hence, it can move across district boundaries. That's the way the sort of plain reading of the text is working. But so there was a lot of discussion about the city planning reports, and I'm sympathetic to what's interesting is both the appellants and counsel, in fact, for the owner were present at the time of the creation of these special districts, right? So appellants cite to reports from the early 90s that expressed concern about towers being over 50 feet high, and that the reports were trying to regulate the heights of towers to be more in the 30 to 40 story range. I don't mean 50 feet, 50 stories high. And trying to regulate the towers to be more in the 30 to 40 story range. So what's strange about that kind of 90s argument is, at the time, nobody could imagine that anyone would build such tiny floor plates. Nobody, I remember actually when I would advise clients and we would figure out the shape of the tower, and as soon as the tower got to be sort of under 6,000 square feet or 8,000 square feet, we'd cut it off, because we say nobody would ever build that, because it's just all staircases and elevators. And now we have several buildings with 4,800 square foot floor plates being built. So that whole idea of keeping height down is sort of old-fashioned according to what's happened in the last 20 years of development, and the mechanical void question aside, right, also never predicted. So, but nonetheless, I do see appellant's point about the relationship between tower coverage and bulk distribution, as illustrated in the chart they provided, which is at section 23-651A3, that, which shows that the two criteria of bulk and tower coverage are linked in proportion to one another, and use the same lot area denominator to calculate coverage and floor area. And it sort of does make sense that there would have been this kind of proportionate analysis, and it doesn't make sense that another provision would just ignore that. But on the other hand, the text seems to be very direct, and it says in the zoning district. So I'm still, I have to say, I'm still struggling with this. I do think that the last submission by appellants in their reply was very strong in going through the sort of the history of city planning's analysis, that the Environmental Simulation Center actually tried to predict how these things would work. And then I go to those types of cases that indicate that when the purpose of the legislature is not being met by text, a court, we're not a court, but a court shouldn't be blindly following the text if the text was badly written, that the comma somewhere forced a reading that undermines what the legislature was looking at. So I would need more from the owner to try to explain how the City Planning Commission's concern, not just the commission, but other electeds' concerns about these high towers. And I remember this was the Millennium Tower, and I remember what an uproar was caused on the Upper West Side because the tower was so big. And so this was an effort to bring tower heights down. And so how do you reconcile the reality of what was stated in the city planning report with the result that is being proposed here of reading the text literally? I mean, I don't argue that the literal reading of the text says you distribute the bulk on both sides. But on the question of mechanical voids, I think the subject is issue precluded as having been decided by this board on September 20th, 2017 in the case 2016-4327A. The subject of whether mechanical space is an accessory use was also considered in that case. So the proper venue for continued discussion on the issues is or was, I believe, in Article 78, and I think the 30 days is up to review that. I do, however, want to correct what I believe is a misapprehension by DOB, who submitted materials of the board's decision on that 30th Street case. While the board did consider whether the amount of floor space being used for mechanical space was customarily found in buildings of the subject type, and did request copies of mechanical drawings that demonstrated how the floor space was being occupied at those floors, the board did not conclude anything about the height of such floors, observing that the zoning resolution gives no guidance as to maximum heights for any of the listed use groups and uses. So, for instance, I know we discussed you could have an apartment with a 40-foot ceiling. There's no prohibition against that, or a classroom or a ballroom or whatever. So that's a way of bringing height up too. Is it artificial? There are apartments that exist that have mezzanines in them already. The famous Gainsborough Studios has, I don't know, 30-foot ceiling, so it's not such a... So, and just to say, because Department of Buildings brought it up, I'd like a bit of clarity on the plan amendment approval dates and the foundation permit issuance. Biz records are confusing because they kind of overwrite, and it's also very hard to follow the sequencing. So they're confusing, and they don't completely agree with DOB's statements that the post-amendment approval permit was only approved on April 4th, 2019. So I'd like to know, when was the post-approval amendment for the foundation approved and permitted? It's just very confusing to follow along those materials, and it's helpful with other cases also. And okay, next. Okay.
I agree with most of the statements you have stated. I'll start with the mechanical void, as you mentioned. I think this, sorry. With regards to I'll start with the mechanical void. As you have stated, this was determined by the board, and if the numbers, the date of the issuance and the vesting, as stated, follows the vesting regulations per ZR 1133, then the project is vested. I don't think any of the other questions is material for a discussion, and so I really don't want to take too much time to discuss that. I think it stands on its own. I do. With regards to the bulk distribution, I'm going to read what I've written. While the appellants are correct in stating that in a split lot condition pursuant to section 7702, the rules of each zoning district to each respective portions of the lot would apply, the subject site is in a special district with its specific regulations. Special districts override underlying zoning regulations where stated, and in this specific case, the zoning resolution section 8234 required the bulk packing to apply uniformly to any zoning lot that is located within the special district, irrespective of a zoning district. The appellants argue that the text intended to apply it only to C47 within the special district. So far from the documentation, I have not found a basis based on the reading of the text and the CPC report. The special district text only in a limited manner uses the phrase. As I was reading the text over and over again, I was trying to find where the phrase within the special district has been applied and in what manner. And it has used the phrase within the special district in a very limited manner. For example, in section 82-10, which is the mandatory district improvement, the phrase has been used, and it has been used in reference to with certain zoning lots. Section 82-20, which is the special use and sign regulations, the phrase has been used with regards to limitations imposed on ground floor use. Section 82-34, which is the subject section that we are discussing, the bulk distribution, it refers to the phrase, but it says where it requires 60% of the floor area permitted on a zoning lot. And 82-35 is also another section where that phrase has been used, and it has been used with regards to subject to height and setback regulations of the underlying district, except where specified. So what I'm trying to get at is that all these four sections, only two of the sections applied to the entire special district, within the special districts. Rest of them, it has the text has been very clear and thorough in carving out areas, street frontages, certain zoning lots, zoning districts, and even to the extent sub-areas. So I think it has been very carefully used, the term, and it has been used with regards to sections where it meant to apply to the entire zoning district, as opposed to where it meant to apply to a portion of a zoning district. For example,
Special district?
yeah, I'm referring to the special district all throughout. I'm not going out of the special district of Lincoln Center. For example, the City Planning Commission report recognized that in sub-district A, the subject site is in sub-district A, where the site is located in sub-district A, where the subject site is located, residential or institutional development are predominant, and that is a community facility could be developed in an R8 and a C47 district. Its concern was with the commercial floor area, and for that, it introduced the section 82-31 to limit the commercial floor area to 3.4 FAR in sub-district A. So that applies to the C47 portion of this site. So I think the drafters of this text at that point were very much aware of the potential for zoning lot merger. And I think, again, this is something the applicants, the owner can verify. When all these soft sites were analyzed, the portion of the subject site that is in the R8 district, if you look at it, if you just look at the building that's in the R8 district, A, it was under different ownership, B, it was fairly built up. So it wouldn't have met the soft side requirement. But if you consider the portion of the...
It was very built up.
It was very built.
So why would it have met the soft site requirement?
It wouldn't have.
Would not have.
It wouldn't have met the soft side
Right,
requirement, except if you consider a portion of its leg that fronts along the 66th Street, that is in the C47 district, then it did have unused floor area. And maybe at that time, the applicant recognized, the commission recognized that there was a possibility for this development, for the R8 use, which was a non-profit group, could be using that air right to sell and use that proceed towards its own future improvements for its non-profit organization. So I'm not saying I know that for sure, but that may have been another reason, because that's the only community facility in the entire R8, the two block to actually 1.5 block that's mapped R8. That's the only community facility building. And I think they probably were aware of the fact that there was a possibility of air right that could have been taken and did not want to take away that opportunity. And the way the air right transfer, as we all know, is through a zoning lot merger. So I just think my understanding and my read of the text, it seems they were very much aware of all the possibilities, and they were very clear in their text. They applied within the special district where it needed to apply. And I completely understand the appellant's reasons and the argument and the way one reads the City Planning Commission report, but as you pointed out, mechanical void was not something at that time an issue. Nobody, and the tower, the fact that a tower footprint of a smaller dimension would even be considered was also not there. So I think those were factors that at that time was not analyzed, and was not even in the real estate picture. So it's not considered. So there is a mismatch.
So I just wanted to pick up on something that you said with the community facility, which was the synagogue, right?
Right.
So the fact that they didn't disturb the tower coverage of the tower regs for the R8 in the special district, right? And so it wouldn't have been unreasonable, because other community facilities were doing it, to imagine that the synagogue site would be built with a tower for the benefit of the synagogue. Other community facilities were doing those kinds of things, the residential above
Right.
and the synagogue below to
Right.
support its future, right? So, okay.
The microphone, please.
I do agree with much of what has been said by the chair.
Speak louder, please.
I do agree with much of what has been said by the chair. I'm struggling with the point of between the text and the intent, and the debate of who should prevail when the two do not coincide. It seems pretty clear that the intent behind the legislation did not anticipate such a tower. But on the other hand, the owner should it be the owner prevails when they rely on text that's unambiguous, or is it that the intent's so clear that this is an absurd result? I'm having a difficulty finding a distinction between the two. I think it was helpful reading the final submission of the appellant, but I'm not convinced yet as to that.
As to which?
As to whether the intent is so clear that this result is ambiguous, this result is absurd, to have such a high tower, that it would override what seems to be plain letter text. With regard to the mechanical void and the accessory use, while I do agree that much of this issue may be precluded, I do also have a certain level of hesitation, because there's a certain, I hate to say, a gut feeling that for it to be considered a mechanical void or be considered accessory use, it can't be superfluous. So for it to fall into that type of caveat of I think that we can't permit any type of exaggeration as to how large or what size this could be.
Right, but we've already talked about this, and I don't want to, I mean, we decided a case upon which, be it city planning, it created a text, which I understand it will be, there's a continuation on that text modification. City council voted on it. They acknowledged that the text was unclear, hence
Right.
amended the zoning resolution. So I don't think there's more for us
I don't
to
think there's
do
much
on
more.
that subject. We've already spoken, so. Anything you wanted to add? No?
Nothing else from me.
Okay. Anything you wanted to add? Okay. Thank you.
That's it.
So we called both cases together on that, right?
Yes, we did. Continued hearing items. Item number 3, 2017-249A, Major Deegan Expressway and south of Van Cortlandt Park, Van Cortlandt, Bronx. We have received a request to withdraw this application. Special order calendar, decision items. Item number 4, 27113BZ, 129 Norfolk Street, Brooklyn. This application is requested to be withdrawn.
We actually never heard this application. It was postponed. Well, maybe we heard it in June. It was closed, yeah. Okay.
You did hear it?
May I move on?
Yes. Yes.
Continued hearing items, item number 5, 42929BZ, 4801 Kings Highway, Brooklyn.
They wanted to adjourn this.
Item number 6, 50937BZ, 20201 Rocky Hill Road, Queens.
Okay.
Yes?
Okay. So I do have to say the drawings are now very good and clear, and I'm very appreciative of them. I can see that the architect really focused on what needed to be done here. All of the notes and requested corrections are shown. We discussed this at the last hearing, that the site's in very poor condition, and there's a lot of concern by community, so the work should be done now. And we'll just give them a lot of time to get it done. And as a reminder that the storage of dead cars is not permitted, that was something that actually the Auburndale Association brought up as an issue there. And I just want to remind the applicant that, who included again a contractor's scope of work. We don't review the contractor's scope of work, so you cannot rely on that for anything. We rely on the drawings, okay? Anybody else on this one?
New cases, item number 7, 28552BZ, 30-14 34th Avenue, Queens.
We have proof of service and notice of hearing to officials. Community Board recommends approval, as does the Queens Borough President. Just a note to our council that there's a proposal to change the hours of operation to 24/7. Signage, there's a proposal about signage that exceeds the C1 regulations. The approved drawings confusingly refer to section 77-211, which is the special permit available for auto service stations in a C2 to C7 district. It allows in C2 districts, BSA to permit illuminated non-flashing signs with total surface area of 150 square feet on per zoning lot, or for the zoning lot. I actually don't understand why the board applied this provision here. This is an R5 district, where in the case of variances such as this, the board limits signage to comply with C1 regulations, which has a 50 square foot illuminated non-flashing maximum per frontage. So I'd suggest here that it's corner lot, and they take advantage of the two frontages on a corner lot and limit it to the C1. The lighting diagram shows very high levels at the property line and then 0 level just on the other side of the line. that's possible when there are pretty amazing shields. I'd like to know whether they put in those amazing light shields. There's a dumpster enclosure installed at an angle, and it's located kind of angling in front of the parking spaces. Because the site plan is so tiny, you can't actually figure out what's going on. I don't understand how that works. It looks like the doors swing right into the cars as they back up. I can see this paving difference of the enclosure, but it looks also like the doors swing into the cars. I just don't understand why it's angled, except to make it easier for a truck maybe to back up to the doors. Anyway, that needs to be explained. And they should need to provide a detail plan and section to show the materials of this enclosure and how it will work. And also, please provide a much bigger site plan that's as detailed as the originally approved site plan. Site plan on these drawings is like, I don't know, 2 or 3 inches. Even when you close in on it, you can't see. The maneuverability diagram doesn't show the need for the 24-foot curb cut on 34th Avenue, which may be needed by cars, but they're only showing maneuverability of, I guess, the fuel truck. And by the way, how do cars get into the 2 parking spaces on 31st Street without driving along the sidewalk? Because the curb cut's on the side, and the parking spaces are headed, and they're on the other side, so you need to drive along the sidewalk in order to get to them, or up the curb. Okay, also, with respect to that larger site plan, there are a number of little ramps that say handicap ramp on the sidewalk. I don't understand what those are. They seem to have you on a sidewalk and you ramp down, and then you're on a sidewalk and you ramp down. I'm not really sure. They seem to be ramping in the wrong direction. I don't understand what they are, but that's partly because the site plan is so tiny, you can't figure it out. So they should also show the elevations of the area around the building that make the ramps necessary. When I say elevations, I mean height above or below grade, or I don't mean vertical. And then they should provide photos of all the site perimeters, including the rear of the building, to show how it's maintained. The rear of the building backs up against residential, so it could be a wreck, we don't know, and they need to maintain that rear.
So you want a 360-degree?
Yeah, if they go walk around the edge of the site and take photographs of it from inside, and then with respect to the rear of their own building, somehow or other get photographs of the rear of their building, because if they're not maintaining it, they need to maintain it. We've had this situation in a couple of other cases. Also, how are adjacent residential uses protected from this use? There isn't actually any information. And then, let's see. So, Chase, I have your comments, but is there anything that you wanted me to, I can just read them, but there are no parking, no vehicles. Nothing, sorry?
There's nothing particular.
Okay. Okay, anybody else?
Yeah. From the diagram, it wasn't clear to me if the trash is being enclosed. There is an existing vacuum machine and air pump which is located at the corner of the site, right where the signpost is there saying Luke Oil. On the base of that sign, it's not shown on the existing or in the proposed plan. I think it's a wrong location for those two to be there, because the only way to use that pump would be if your vehicle is parked on the sidewalk. And Google View actually shows that. There is one that is using the vacuum pump and a car is parked on the sidewalk. So it should be relocated from there. The other one is with regards to the statement. The statement says 5 parking spaces plus 1 handicap parking. So I would think that is total of 6 parking spaces. However, the plan is showing total of 5. So those need to be reconciled. I also had question about the signage, and the signage did not factor in any signs, existing or additional proposed, if any, on the building. It only shows the signage of the signposts, so those also need to be analyzed. And I don't remember seeing the shields on my site visit. But the applicant can confirm that.
Okay. Commissioner Otley Brown?
No additional comment.
Okay.
Nothing from me either.
Appeals cases, new cases, item number 8, 2018, 125A, 4095 Wild Avenue, Staten Island.
Okay, this one was postponed last time for failure to give notice. We have proof of service of initial application to officials and now have notice of hearing to officials. We read these comments actually at the last review session. Community Board recommends approval. I'd like to know how far the subject site is from the nearest map street. We don't have a fire department comment, I don't believe, on this. Fire department needs also to comment on access to the rear parking through a 28-foot wide by unknown height underpass. You actually have to pass under something. And should the building be sprinklered, if it was my question. Applicant should provide an elevation of the building to aid fire department in its review, because I don't know how high the underpass is. DEP provided a letter of no objection in July of last year. DEC issued in December of last year a letter stating it has no jurisdiction. There was a memorandum of law attempting to argue that the hardship finding required under GCL 36 has been met here. The memo I found rather unfocused and wandering. To be clear for the record, the board is not required to follow precedent if it finds circumstances have changed that obliges it to consider different approaches. A better argument I would recommend in this case is that the subject lot is the only unimproved lot on Wild Avenue between Victory Boulevard and the service road of West Shore Expressway, with access to major commercial uses on the same side of Wild Avenue. So it's kind of like if this had been a residential use, this would have met the Section 3 GCL 36 waiver. So it's kind of unfortunate that commercial buildings don't benefit from that. I note that the proposal here is to continue the sidewalk at the same width as on either side of the subject lot, which is a good thing. I'd like fire department to note and comment on the fact that parking along Wild Avenue nearest Victory Boulevard is head-in rather than parallel and appears even to be on the sidewalk. So I don't know what that does to fire department access on this road. And there were other comments from other commissioners that I can read, or you can read?
I had one comment, and that was that the zoning chart and the statement of facts refers to a two-story building, whereas the plan indicates one-story building.
Right. And Commissioner Shibeta also had a comment about common ownership with any adjoining lots. He wanted to know whether there is common ownership with adjoining lots. Okay.
Okay, new cases, item number, are we calling those together? You want to do separately?
Let's say, to complete. I think they need to be called separately because the findings are different.
Okay,
right?
that's what, let me make sure. Item number 9, 2019-17 BZY 30 West 39th Street, Manhattan.
So this is under 11331, extension of time to complete construction, basically. So we have proof of notice of hearing to officials, but I didn't find proof of service of the initial application to officials, although Community Board 5 heard the application, so
It's
it was
there.
obviously sent.
Yes.
I need clarity on when the application was filed. It must be 30 days after the lapse of the permit on December 20th to qualify for an 11-331 extension. The earliest PDFs that I found in the folder are timestamped March 21st, 2019.
They did submit, it was unfortunate, it was superseded, the form,
Yeah.
the BZY form, unfortunately was not uploaded. I'll have to put it in.
So please upload that.
Yeah,
because
I'm
I
sorry.
need to be able to see that it was submitted. Okay. Community Board 5's very detailed recommendation to deny dated March 6, 2019 describes work ongoing subsequent to the enactment date and on nights and weekends when arguably after-hour permits were not in place. DOB issued a letter stating that the NB permit was issued on October 31, 2018, when the vesting date is December 20th, right? It does not, DOB's letter does not indicate whether there is a look back to foundation permits issued July 23rd, 2018. This is kind of a theme in the last few days, to just understand, you get a foundation permit because that's what's allowed, right? You can file a foundation permit without filing, I thought there was a while where you couldn't do this, but now you can, it seems, without filing the NB drawings. So it's just a foundation permit, and I don't even know whether it indicates what you're going to be building on top, right? So, in this case, I actually don't know. So, I need more information from DOB on how they look at this, whether they consider the foundation permit attached to the NB as a related, that's the issue, is the related permit. So again, this question, which is what I've been saying, is are the approved foundation drawings linked to the building for which vesting is sought? Does DOB look back to the foundation permit in terms of when it considers all work related to the NB related work? It looks like all the permitting, though, referred to a hotel, even in the foundation permit stage, so a little different from another case we have. With respect to the 11-331 finding that foundations had to have been substantially complete by the enactment date, a detailed timeline that corresponds to when work was conducted during legitimate working hours must be provided. For example, and there is a lot of material provided, and I looked at it, there are field logs that show workers working 10 to 11-hour days during the week. So in order to do that, you have to have an after-hours permit, because they say the workers are working 8 hours, but I don't know if union hours are 8 hours. They might be 7. So I actually don't know what the official non-after-hours work hours are, if they're 7 or 8 hours. So, and so I'd like to know whether those days correspond to any after-hour permit days. I looked at the after-hours permits that they provided. There were no late night work weekday permits. There were only Saturday after-hour permits provided. And if I compare them to the log books, for example, on Saturday, September 1 and September 8th, there are Saturday after-hour permits, but the log shows no work was done on those days. So what that tells me is perhaps the logs are not accurate, because if you're in a rush to finish, you use your after-hours permits unless there's something going on, right? And usually that's indicated in the log. It'll say, you know, concrete contractor hasn't been paid or didn't show up or something like that. But then there'll be 2 guys on the job because they're waiting for the truck to arrive and something, but there was no indication at all. And then the log report indicates that many of these daily logs were written weeks after the work date. Like one of them was written in January, weeks after the report dates of early December. So where that come from, and you know, sometimes on a job site, the logs are actually just kept in like a composition notebook. So maybe there's a notebook where it's actually recording this, and the person who was inputting this data into this computer program wasn't quite up to technological speed, sort of. So seeing a workbook that's more like a composition notebook or whatever it is would be maybe more accurately represent when there was work and when it corresponded to after hours. We had another case like this where the after hours work, some of it was had to be excluded, some of it was allowed to be included, And then that goes to how much of the foundation work is actually allowed to be considered in place. They need to provide copies of approved foundation and architectural plans. We have approved SOE. I think, we might have approved foundation, but I don't know if we have we don't have architectural. I don't know what this is. So I say there are a bunch of issues that are open here with respect to this finding for 11331. Anybody else on this?
No, I don't.
I do. It would be helpful, I agree with you, if they address the after-hours work and discount it from the totals if they don't have the permits to match it. And it would also be helpful if they gave us, even though they said the rat slab doesn't account for that much concrete, to just strengthen their application by giving us the amount of concrete that was poured there as well. And as to the expenditure portion, it would also be helpful if they could break their checks out into checks that were paid prior to the change and checks that were paid afterwards, but related to costs that were incurred prior to that change. And it's kind of like all lumped together. They do make a mention of it, but then when you sort through the checks and you start counting, you see that the most expensive checks were actually written after the date of the text amendment. So that should be clarified.
Okay, is that it?
For the BZY,
For that one.
that's what I have.
Okay, thank you.
I did have a really quick comment about the New York City construction code. So section 28-104.2.5 covers phased or partial approvals, and subdivision 2 of that provides that you have to submit a complete zoning analysis showing compliance of the proposed work with the zoning resolution. And then the second to last statement says that the issuance...
Sorry, you have to provide it for what purpose?
For phased or partial approvals of construction, so when you're, the next sentence is, the issuance of such foundation and earthwork permit is subject to submission of required submittal documents. So you can't get a foundation or earthwork permit without showing a complete zoning analysis.
Okay, so according to that, if they have approved foundation drawings, there should be attached somewhere to that, the zoning.
A complete zoning analysis.
Yeah, okay.
Should I also make mention that, I don't know if it's relevant in the BZY, I know where the A case coming up, that we were alerted that there was continuous work on the site, and we did reach out to DOB.
Yeah.
Okay.
Today.
No, this is done prior.
Sorry, you were alerted that there was continuous work?
The work, they were still continuing to work, and we sent a notice to DOB.
Right, and the community board said that there was work going on. When, on the day that they were voting, they had testimony, they were looking at it in March, and that very day, there was testimony that work was continuing, so
So we have to just count all
in
of that.
violation of the stop work. I don't know if there's actually a stop work on the job. There should be.
It seems like it's pretty clear that there was a substantial amount of illegal
Yeah, I'll
work
have to find
done.
the email, I'm sorry, I couldn't find the email.
And I'd like a better understanding of how much of that was completed?
Well, how much of what was completed?
Work without a permit.
Okay.
Work pursuant to a stop work, or work that was done under what could be a stop work order.
I don't think there was a stop work order.
No,
That's
I
what
don't.
you just
Continue to
stated.
work, they
They
continue
continue
to
to work.
work past the
See,
date.
I
Okay.
think what happened is, no stop work was issued, and a
Okay.
contractor keeps working until somebody tells them to stop working. So if there's a lapse of a permit, who knows? Because there's no stop work, and there's no inspector comes out. Normally with these vesting case situations, an inspector goes out like the day of the change, right? Now granted, this was citywide, so that means you would have had to have an inspector look at every M district and see what's under construction in the M districts, right? That's a lot of investigating, because there are a lot of M districts, right? But it doesn't sound like they ever had to stop work, except for that one day in October where it was lifted the same day. So that's the part that's confusing in terms of how it's managed by DOB, but it doesn't change the fact that the permit lapsed on the date of the text change, and the property owner had to have been aware, because otherwise, why were they rushing so hard, right? or maybe they, I don't know if they were rushing, if they didn't work on Saturdays when they had after-hour permits. That's quite strange. So,
Yeah, I find, you stated earlier that who knows, I think they knew that their permit lapsed, you know, and I'd like to know how much work.
The contractor probably didn't know, because contractor might
Right.
not have been up on zoning, but a developer probably knows, right?
Right.
Contractors, you know, a bunch of guys who are just like building stuff. That's what they do, right? Okay,
Okay, now the A.
yeah.
Item number 10, 2019-175A, 30 West 39th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, similarly, we have proof of service of hearing to officials. I didn't find proof of service of initial application, but we have Community Board 5 who heard the application. The same comments, they were actually looking at this as a 11331 case. That's why they went through those findings. DOB issued a letter again stating that the NB permit was issued on October 31st, 2018, which again is confusing because that wouldn't be enough time to do almost any work to get your foundations in the ground, right? So between then and December 20th, so it assumes kind of some kind of a look back with the foundations, which were foundation permit that was issued in July. So my question is the same on this one. How does DOB read this? With Kurt's recitation of that section in the building code, that there needed to have been a zoning approval. So it kind of assumes there were some kind of drawings that were submitted that were more than the foundation drawings. Correction, we do have copies of the approved foundation and approved supportive excavation drawings, but we need the approved architectural plans and the approved zoning drawings that were submitted with the foundations. I'd like to understand what percentage of foundation-only work as opposed to excavation and supportive excavation is in place, because that's the critical question here. For me, what portion of the foundation work could not be repurposed for an office building? Because they're really, you know, it's a hole in the ground, and then there's this slab that's poured. And I actually, Commissioner Shetta is away, but I did ask him to look at the supportive excavation and the foundation drawings. And I don't want to put words in his mouth too much, but he said that for the most part, that work can be repurposed unless the design of an office building is really different from the design of a hotel. Like, and I'm not even sure what that would be, because yes, the elevators might move to a different place, but that doesn't mean you throw out everything. There might be quite a lot of other work that could be retained, and so then the question would be, what would the loss be in terms of the change needed to turn it into a conforming use? And of the past and future obligations for electrical, I'd like to know what portion could be repurposed, because if it's a future obligation, I signed a contract, and if I proceed, you guys have to put in the electrical. That doesn't deprive the electrical contractor of anything. They just put the electrical in a different way, right? So it seems that the main economic loss would be the engineering and architectural drawings, so the soft costs of preparing those materials. And those were my comments.
I think on this one, what I found interesting is that they applied the requirements of the special permit section that City Planning Commission would review to allow a hotel in an M district. And one of the takeaway for me was that the hotel sets back from the street line. So the foundation has been designed in a manner where it has the foundation for the cellar and for the ground level entry lobby, but after that, the tower is set back from both frontages. So that does change the construction of the building, and I also would like to know how much that can be repurposed as an office building, that kind of a foundation construction. And
Which kind of foundation construction? If they
The-
didn't build it the way it says in the city planning
right,
requirements?
right. I mean, so I think since the building is set back both from both the, it's a through lot. So if the building is set back from both street frontages, the foundation is going to be mostly in the middle of it. So that would require a lot of cantilevering out to have a bigger floor plate for office space. A hotel floor plate is much narrower than an office floor plate. So to maximize it as an office space, one would have to cantilever it out from the middle as much out to make, to take the office load. Whereas the foundation that is there on along the street line, it's really not designed for the load above, because there's nothing above it. It's just a one-story base at most, maybe in some area, or the driveway through. So I would like the applicant to explain that, and how, again, going back to Commissioner Shetta's thing, how that can be repurposed as an office space based on the design of the building, which is a building, a tower in the middle, setback from property line.
So I have the same questions that I had prior for the prior case. They should just update the numbers in this case as well. And then I have a question about expenditures. They talk about including for common law vested rights, the acquisition and demolition costs. And in addition to that, they also give even more financing costs and fees, soft costs and insurance and taxes. And being that that's listed twice, I would just love them to tell me the difference between both of them, so I'm sure that they're not double counting.
Can you explain
And
that
remove the
again?
acquisition
I'm sorry.
costs though, right?
Cost and fee?
So they talk about their expenditures, and they give a list of all the expenditures. And the list is similar to the list in the BZY case. And then they say, rightly so, that with the common law vesting, they're also allowed to look back to the overall
Right.
investment, which is the land purchase and the demolition costs. But also listed under there are more financing costs and fees, soft costs, insurance, and taxes. And I just want them to explain how that's different from the other list of financing and fees, soft costs, insurance, and taxes that appear right above it.
But why
But
can't,
the acquisition costs are not permitted. We don't
And
take,
In a common law vested, you could go back to the entire investment and look at the entire investment back to acquisition costs. Not in the BZY case, but in the A case, you can look at everything, because you're trying to make a case that the entire investment is going to be lost. And so you're taking in everything you can.
but in terms of the repurposing, if you allow for repurposing of like foundations, let's say it's just excavation, say it's not foundations, it's excavation and like a slab, something really basic that just needs to go down there. Both the acquisition costs and the excavation could be repurposed. So then where would the serious
be a
loss?
loss.
Well, right, we didn't get to the serious
Ah,
loss. I'm
oh,
just
okay.
in expenditures, I didn't get to the serious loss conversation. Yeah, just talking about how there's a look back for the common law that goes further back for expenditures.
Okay.
And that's all, I just wanted them to explain that to me. Now, as for serious loss, I feel that they put together a decent narrative explaining, you know, how long it would take for them to get the approval, the ULURP approval, and it would take 2 years, and how long it would take to actually get income on an office building if they pursued that. But they need to actually give more quantifying in terms of what that actually means in a dollars and cents analysis. And so they need to tell us if they have to redo the foundation in order to accommodate the core. They have to quantify what that means in terms of new plans, in terms of demolishing parts of that foundation and retaining part of it, and then pouring part of the new foundation. They need to quantify all of that. And then also, when it comes down to the actual income loss, because we have seen an analysis often for serious loss that goes into an income loss, it has to be based on something. So they give us the income that an office building could get in the retail space, but then it goes on to basically talk about an office value. But that's not really what we're looking at. We're looking at the loss. And so we need to know what is the income that a hotel would get, and then kind of do a balancing act based on that. Hotel income would be this amount, and office building would be only this amount, and that's how we could look at how there would be a loss. And they don't provide us, at least I couldn't find anywhere, what the room income would be.
But at the same time, serious loss doesn't look at highest and best use, right?
So that's why they kind of moved to an appraisal of the office building, but that's not really what we're looking at. So we're looking at a loss in income, and that's not necessarily a highest and best use. It's just we could get, 5 million in income in this investment, and we can only get 2 million in income in this investment. It's more of a clear analysis when the loss of the right to vest really results in a smaller building. That's often where it's clearest, but you could still apply that here. And it'll just help to fill the picture out for
Yeah,
us.
yeah, okay.
Again, don't mean to be repetitive, but I do want a little clarity on the 11.4% of what the estimated construction costs incurred by the effective date is. I want to get a little bit more of a basis on that. And is that 11.4% now including the soft costs and the acquisition costs that Commissioner Otley-Brown just mentioned? Because it doesn't seem like it would be. So I believe that a lesser percent is completed by the effective date. And I don't know what that percent is.
You're talking about hard costs?
All costs.
All
And the vesting case, you're allowed to include your soft costs.
Right.
I also believe that there needs to be a stronger argument for serious loss. I have not been convinced by what has been submitted at this point.
Move on? Item number, zoning calendar, continued hearing items. Item number 11, 2016-4469BZ, 4923 Astoria Boulevard, Queens.
Okay. As of right, plans were revised to take full advantage of the floor area ratio, but I still don't see the hardship. So for me, we haven't moved to the B finding. A letter from a broker explains that the site isn't ideal. We discussed that the site isn't ideal at the last hearing, but nonetheless, I think it's a nice little house with ample space for a single or small two-family, similar to what exists already in the neighborhood. The yard sizes comply with zoning, and we often see such reduced yards with houses of this size. Good fencing and landscaping would make this location private and protected from adjoining commercial uses. Sites like this actually make great homes for moderate income families, so didn't get to the A.
I agree with you.
I agree with you. I didn't get to the A. I still had questions about the B, should we ever have gotten to the A? And certainly, I'm pushing back on that E and the statement that they gave us about the cap rate. So, I don't know, how long are we going to?
We're done.
Entertain this?
Okay, we are done?
We were giving them one last chance. That's what, actually, my notes said, we're giving them one last chance to make their A.
Okay, so
That is it.
I agree with the two of
Okay.
you.
We're all on board here.
Okay.
Item number 12, 2018-33BZ, 3141 97th Street, Queens.
Plans were revised to show the required planting area at the front. I think the study in support of a zero lot line 20-foot wide building was very good and persuaded me that a 17-foot wide building with a narrow side yard would be out of context in this neighborhood and especially on the social block. Anyway, it's only a 3-foot wide side yard that you could barely get your body down, so Any other comments on that?
I actually was okay with this project, and I think given when I looked at the site again and the corresponding buildings, most of these buildings, I mean, they predate the underlying zoning regulations, and they do have side yards, but their side yards are shared side yards, whereas this building does not have that luxury of getting a shared side yard. So even if those buildings, the pre-61 buildings had a side yard, they're not complying 8-foot side yards. So I think in this case, and I looked at what would happen if this site did have to give away 3-foot wide side yard. You would be left with development where the interior typical living room width would be reduced to 10-foot wide, because you have the staircase that you have to eliminate, that goes to the second floor, and then you have the entryway to the first floor. I was just looking at the first floor, so you have a staircase that leads to the second floor, and you have a entryway to the first floor. That leaves you with just a 10-foot wide living room space, and it reduces it to 1 bedroom. You can't even get 2 bedrooms. So I do think, given the context, foregoing the 3-foot side yard is very reasonable.
I think also the issue is that it's not one of a pair.
Right.
The ones that have those 8-foot shared side yards, or whatever it is, they're 4 and 4.
Right.
They are semi-detached, and so it's like a collection of pairs that go down the street.
Exactly.
So this is like half a pair.
Right, and this doesn't
Right.
have the other pair,
Yeah.
so it cannot even if
Right.
it chose to, it benefits no one.
Right. Anybody else?
Item number 13, 2018-39 BZ, 1249 East 23rd Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, the rear yard information was provided showing there are existing 2.5-story houses on either side with 23-foot rear yard and an 18-foot rear yard built full height. So the argument for a 20-foot rear yard here at the second floor is reasonable because it's a split of the difference, even if I think it's less desirable because I lament the loss of these rear yards. Anyway, anybody else?
No.
Item number 14, 2018-52 BZ, 159 Borum Street, Brooklyn.
So I note on this case, we had a submission on Friday to correct some of the submissions. So if I'm asking for a correction in something, it's because maybe I didn't see whether or not it corrected the incorrect thing. But I did look at the new submission, but when we get these submissions at the last minute, it's very hard to know whether something else is wrong. Anyway, so they revised plans were provided showing now 42 parking spaces on stackers in the cellar and 23 spaces at grade clear of the drive-through lane for a total of 65 on-site spaces, where there are 161 units, of which 128 units are market rate, requiring 90 spaces as of right, 70% of the units. It is proposed to place 25 of those required spaces off-site at the other property at 222 Johnson. The parking study, based on a weighted average of area census tract data, concludes that the on-site demand will be 65 spaces. This plan set, to make this easier for us, this plan set includes the cellar plans for the Johnson Street building, which is incorrectly labeled as 159 Boyrum. To indicate that the Boyrum site depends on off-site parking at Johnson, a site plan showing the location of Johnson and the number of provided parking spaces there is all that's needed in this plan set. Otherwise, it's far too confusing in the future. I was like 20 minutes looking at the building saying, did they change the configuration of the building? Are they building underneath the adjoining lot now? Because the Johnson building is really long, whereas this building is a square. And it was labeled Boyrum, so I'm thinking it must be. So it's pretty crazy. So it should be taken out of the set and replaced with a site plan that just says, go find your other 25 spaces over there. Okay. And we also had a note from before that Department of Buildings requires a restrictive declaration for on-site parking. Off-site parking, which will need to be recorded prior to permitting. Okay?
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, just to clarify for the applicant, so on the Borum one, remove the Johnson parking, or do you want?
Remove the drawing of Johnson
Got it.
from the plan set.
So they're two
because-
separate independent?
Yeah, it shouldn't,
Okay.
I was so confused staring at this plan. I didn't know if, they had an as-of-right drawing, they had a proposed drawing, and then another proposed drawing, and I'm like, is this another option that we build underneath an adjoining lot that I don't know about? So.
But a note referring to the Johnson would be appropriate.
So there should be a site plan.
Yes.
That indicates on the site plan that there's 25 parking spaces located at 222 Johnson that are for the use of the Borum site, okay?
Thank you.
Okay. So the restrictive deck, and again, this is one of those things where I'm pretty sure it was corrected. The restrictive deck had an error, but I believe was corrected on Friday to show 65 spaces at Borum and 25 at Johnson. The EAS, however, was not corrected on Friday and still shows, I believe, 60 spaces at Borum and 30 at Johnson. That was the mistake that was running through all the materials. We received very recently these, a 421A worksheet, which is what we had asked for, but in fact, it was for a different kind of 421A, so they filled out a different worksheet, and that worksheet is produced by, it's a computer program. You fill it in, and then it tells you whether it's pass-fail, like right there. So it shows the proposed unit mix of affordable units, but it actually shows that the proposed mix does not meet standards. In two cases, the deviations were very slight, which the applicant says, they'll work that out with HPD. But in one case, they didn't mention at all that, that the thing called unit mix is a total fail, and I don't know what to say about that. The text B unit mix says affordable housing units are required to be 50% two-bedroom or larger and no more than 25% zero bedrooms. So this doesn't provide 50% two bedrooms and larger. There's a chart here, and it provides 41% one bedrooms. And maybe it's because the computer doesn't know what to do, because it's expecting to see 50% and under 25%, and when it doesn't see that, it doesn't know what to do with one bedrooms. Maybe it's just this computer thing, but the applicant, though, in their cover letter explained the tiny deviations of like 1%, they made no mention of this fail point. So I don't know what that means, and the reason I bring this up is because if HPD requires them to change the unit mix, they're back here. Right? So that means the parking count is different. So that's arguably the one place where they can't not know, right? Because we're all about parking, which is completely based on the number of units. So they need to deal with that, because let's just say they really failed, they're stacking. That doesn't affect us. So move the units around a different way, right? And the stacking, they're off by like 1% or something. But let's just say they failed it, they could move it around the building and stay with the same number of units, and it wouldn't affect our parking count. But this totally affects our parking count, so they need to figure that out.
As I was reviewing the text, there were a lot of inconsistencies throughout the different documents. I didn't have a chance to review the latest submission, so I will look at it today and see if it responds to many of my comments. With regards to the 421A, the spreadsheet that they have provided, this would be just my suggestion, is that, that while they have submitted it and we recognize there are some fail elements in that, I don't think we should be, we definitely should not be reviewing it, because that's not our forte, and there are a lot of other things that goes into this analysis. I can say that from the experience that I had in reviewing some 421A projects back then at HPD. And this, I think we should put a note to the applicant that whatever happens, especially with regards to the unit count, if that results in lesser number of units or more number of market rate units, they're back to us. That's a warning, and that's going to be in our statement. I don't think what discussions they're going to have with HPD and how they're going to resolve that, it's something we cannot project, and we should just leave it for that and put that in our notes, in our resolution very clearly that we are not weighing in on any one of those factors. The parking requirement is X for so much of market rate units, and if there is any change to it, the parking requirement analysis doesn't hold. They just have to come back. Some language to that effect has to be added in there, but I really don't want us to kind of weigh in on it at this stage, because we really don't know how the discussion with HPD is going to try. There are too many moving pieces, and each one can affect the other
Right.
ones.
So, but what I'd like to suggest in that case is there's a restrictive declaration where they have to provide this many units, and it says if any of those units change, comply with zoning. We could
Right.
also say, or maybe that covers it, we need to look at the language more closely. We could add to it that if the unit mix changes, where it requires an increase in the amount of required parking, then they have to return to us, right? So we could just add that one line, assuming that the sentence that we have already doesn't cover that. I would need to sit there and read it and really think about whether it already covers it. So we could add. Okay, anything else?
Item number 15, 2018-55BZ, 222 Johnson Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. This one also had a lot of inconsistencies in the materials, and then they submitted very late a modification to the materials, and so you're like trying to read really quickly and find the corrections. So, but at the last hearing on this one, we expressed frustration that the Johnson site was now being used to pick up the 20, at the time it was 30-space parking shortfall, and now it's 25-space parking shortfall of the increased unit capacity at the Boyer site, while unable to meet its own demand. The current plans show required parking for the market rate units of 46 spaces, a request to eliminate the required 34 parking spaces for the existing restrictive housing site, while also accommodating the 25 spaces required for Boyer, which would result, if we allowed the full waiver of 34 spaces, a requirement of 71 spaces on the site. The as-of-right drawings show that 103 spaces could fit on the site without any structural or partition modifications, just by using more stackers. The restrictive deck does not reflect the parking count shown on the plans. It says 46 plus 30 equals 76. However, the EAS and the parking study were revised with a second submission on July 25th to reflect the actual parking count on the plans. So this lack of coordination by the applicant is quite frustrating, because this really was only about changing two numbers on some documents, right? At the last hearing, we directed the applicant to satisfy the peak demand on site. The revised parking study remains more or less consistent with the last, with a peak demand for the Johnson project of 63 spaces. The study states that the demand is more than satisfied by the provision of 76 spaces on site, where in fact, of course, only 71 are provided. But of those 71 spaces, 25 are set aside for Boyer. And we said at the last hearing that you can't double dip. Here they are double dipping. The actual demand on this site is 63 plus 25 equals 87 spaces. We directed the applicant to provide 90 spaces on this site based on the last demand study, and I absolutely don't understand why there is this refusal to comply with our simple and very direct instructions, especially because the as-of-right shows you can fit 108 spaces. So put the 90 spaces on the site. What is going on here? And as with the Boyer project, we also have a shortfall on the the proportionality and unit mix, it's the same thing. They have a significant fail on those, which again, we could cover with something in the restrictive deck that says, if you change your unit mix. And the applicant states that reservoir spaces are not needed for these projects. I don't know if that's true, but what I would like then is to add to the drawings and in our conditions that DOB must verify that the parking layout complies with all applicable regulations, so it doesn't look like we're waiving reservoir if that's a requirement, because they cite to some section in the code and they say it's not required, but that's strange because we always look at reservoir spaces on these parking lots, so parking garages. So anything else?
I made a little chart for myself just to understand what's happening on Borum, what's happening on Johnson, what is proposed, how much of affordable dwelling unit, how much of market rate based on what is the parking requirement. As I see it, based on the analysis that they have provided, I haven't done my own separate calculations, just using their charts, it seems Johnson would require 46 parking spaces for 92 market rate units. So 46 plus the 25 that Borum is, it would work.
71.
Right, it would meet to 71, so.
So
but the
it
20
it has to do with demand. So absolutely right, they're providing 71 spaces on site. But the
Right.
demand study says they need 63 spaces. So they're saying, look, we have 71 spaces. But 25 of those spaces are parking for another building, so you can't count them. So instead, you have 46 spaces, and the demand is 63.
But I guess I'm looking at it maybe from different, and help me understand it. Zoning requires parking requirement based on how many market rate units at. Zoning doesn't require it based on the demand. Zoning requires it by
Yes.
parking. So based on the zoning requirement, 46 parking spaces are required for the 92 market rate units.
Correct, plus 34 required for the restrictive housing, which is what we're being asked to waive. So when we're asked to waive, we look at demand. We do that with all of our waiver applications. So for example, the most obvious ones are the medical offices and the offices, right? They say, look, you can waive 50% of the spaces, and we say, oh, but your demand says you need 60% of the spaces. So provide 60% and we'll waive that other 40. And that's just how we've consistently looked at it. When we look at variances, that's a different thing. With variance, it's like there's no place to put the parking, or it's a different analysis, right?
But again, if today the affordable housing with the market rate was built, with the restrictive housing that they're seeking the waiver, today the zoning resolution would not require parking for the restricted housing units.
No.
It
76.
requires parking because these are whatever date.
I'm saying,
housing.
if, let's say, the site is completely empty today, and they were going to build a mix of affordable and market rate housing, per zoning resolution, the parking will only be required for those market rate units. It wouldn't be for any of the affordable units.
It's not the affordable units in this building. It's not required in this building. Ignore it.
I
It's
know.
only the other site that has 34 required spaces when it was built pursuant to 2525, section 2525, right?
Right, and isn't that going to remain affordable?
Yes, but we're being asked to waive the requirement of those 34 spaces. That's the special permit before us.
I
actually,
understand
right?
that.
So what we're doing is saying, we're looking at, that's how we do it. We look at demand. And for instance, when we look at the medical offices, we don't just look at the demand for the medical office. We look at the demand for the retail. We look at the demand for whatever other activity that there is on the site. Like we have this next case where we're looking at PCE demand and daycare demand and all of that. And we're looking at all those uses together, even though the waiver request is only for the offices in that kind of a case, right?
We're
And-
looking at some of the notes.
Sorry,
We're
speak
We're
louder.
looking at some of the notes. So
the other Borum is providing 65 on-site spaces, but I think their demand showed 65.
Yes.
So they're meeting their demand on site, so the 25 at Johnson are like open, I guess, in a
Well,
sense.
they're not open, they're required by zoning.
They're required by zoning, but then they won't need them
So
for
the
demand,
difference is
right?
that the 25 other spaces that Borum has a requirement for whatever that is,
Yeah.
90 spaces under zoning.
Yes.
And what we did on that one, to see whether we would waive the existing 18 spaces that are occupied by the restrictive housing, right? We said, well, let's check. Is your demand less than what you're providing? And the answer was, demand is less than what you're providing. Zoning requires you to have 90 spaces, more than enough. So complying with zoning means that you can get the waiver of the 18 spaces. Here, complying with zoning doesn't meet demand of the building on the site, and so we consistently do this. This is every application we do where there's a waiver of parking spaces. So I don't want to start creating new criteria. It makes it just more confusing. And I think it's also not the right thing to do. Demand is indicating there's a need, and the 25 spaces belong to Borum. They're supposed to be specifically allocated for the Borum site. And the demand studies, of course, are based on, which is what we talked about also, census data that may not be up to date. So the census data may not be reflecting sort of the upscaling of the neighborhood, because this is market rate housing where more and more people have cars to drive to, Long Island or whatever it is. So it'd be different if this was all about low-income housing where fewer people arguably have cars, but this is also about upscale housing where more and more people bizarrely actually have cars, even though they live close to public transit. So I think we covered this, but I want to be consistent with all of our other special permit applications to reduce parking. Okay. Anybody else?
Item number 16, 2018-136BZ, 25177 Jericho Turnpike, Queens. And you want to do item number 17 too?
Yeah.
Item number 17, 2018-137BZ, also Jericho Turnpike. And item number 18.
They've been called separately in the
They've been
past.
called, yeah. So, it's just always confusing to read them all together but we end up talking about one or the other. So let's read them separately because that's what we've done. But
Okay, so you just want to do
the first one,
2018-136BZ?
yeah, it's just.
This is the parking reduction.
Okay, so the parking reduction, anyway, it needs to be separate because I understand they're actually going to withdraw this application, and they're proposing to extend the cellar excavation underneath the parking area to add new parking stalls that use that automated single-level sliding puzzle-type parking system. And I actually don't understand how the cars will travel from the ramp over the Gotham system, that's the puzzle system, into the stackers. But frankly, I don't think we need to understand that because they just have to provide the required parking, just go do it. I don't know. The required spaces for the various uses, assuming daycare, PCE, or otherwise, just need to be provided, whatever that is. If and I'm not really 100% sure that they didn't submit a letter of withdrawal. They just instead said, we think we're going to withdraw this application, so we're not considering a reduction in parking at this point, right? That's what they told us. Okay.
Item number 17, 2018-137BZ. This is the daycare, request special permit for the daycare.
There was a threshold finding for the 7319 special permit with respect to this the after-school program for children older than 5 years, which is neither a 1210 school nor a 1210 daycare. Either the applicant is waiting for an answer from DOB, which was not clear on a ZRD1, or they need to do a better job with explaining how this use is accessory, as is customarily found with daycare. They need to go through the classic accessory findings. They just kind of threw it out there, it must be accessory because, but they didn't actually go through the case history on what constitutes an accessory use. The broker's letter that they provided, in my mind, leaves open the question of what built or in construction sites were looked at with 17,000 square feet of floor area on one or more floors, because they're splitting this use on at least 2 floors. It's actually 3. With rooftop or yard access. The 36 sites mentioned in the letter were apparently vacant lots for purchase, which is not what is being pursued in this case, so I don't think it's parallel. School safety and Department of Health expressed concerns about this site, in particular about the protection from car circulation at the driveway and how children will be protected there. We'll need a sign off from these agencies. We don't have that yet. The plans were revised to show a 3-foot wide sidewalk along the building. I don't believe that 3 feet is adequate to accommodate strollers and wheelchairs. 3 feet's very tight. The circulation in that area is very tight, as we discussed last time. The driveway will be handling underground parking for 144 cars, plus 9 daycare drop-offs and potentially other drop-offs. No sidewalk at all is shown directly in front of the daycare entrance, so you actually have the tightest conversions of all activities at this entry point. So the applicant needs to describe better how the queuing area to the west of the incoming stop bar works. It looks like if there is any buildup of cars at all, they will impede access to the daycare that moves that there's a daycare drive that moves counterclockwise with 10-minute drop-offs, 10-minute parking spots in 1 to 9. So it seems like if there's any buildup at all, you won't be able to either get into that 10-minute drop-off or circulate around to get out of it, because there is just going to be confusion. So I don't actually understand still how so much circulation actually functions to get people in and out of the garage. It looks as if there is only 8 foot 9 inches clear between the valet parking slowdown, or is that a queuing location? I don't really know what that thing is. There's a stop bar and curbside parking on the site itself to enter into and exit from the parking garage and the daycare drop-off area. They provided a vehicle circulation plan that actually doesn't show how this would work at all. It's just the same plan, but it doesn't show what the vehicles do. There's no drawings of cars. There's a description, but that's not the same thing as a drawing. Absolutely all non-drop-off parking for medical, daycare, retail, and PCE must be valet. Access to the medical office and the PCE is from the drop-off valet handoff, which is at the cellar level, and then the people walk to the elevators at that level. So that's the only way to drive to the site, is you must go down into the valet parking. And so what does it mean for people who don't want to pay for parking? I don't know. There's only one legal means of egress from the first floor to the exterior in the daycare. The other means goes through an occupied space. I don't know if that's allowed. The first floor only has fewer than 75 people on it, but it is, after all, little kids. And then when you're egressing from the upper floors, the staircase goes directly outside, but through a fire corridor. But in order to get to that fire corridor on the first floor, you have to go through an occupied space, which I know is a no-no. With the exception of the convenience stair, there is a convenience stair C. Stairways A and B go directly down fire corridors to the exterior. That convenience stair C, though, depends on anyone using that as an egress, whether or not it's an official egress, will have to go through that occupied space. I'm not sure that stair D is a means of egress from the cellar levels, since they're blocked by parking stackers, so I'd like fire department to look at that. stairs don't just go down, they go up. So you can't actually get your body into stair D. And we also discussed the medical office drop-off on Jericho as being impractical. That wasn't addressed. Impractical because Jericho's a really, really busy throughway. The sidewalk from the drop-off parking should continue straight to the crossing and not require a sharp right onto a narrow sidewalk. So it has you walking on a wider sidewalk with a stroller or a wheelchair, taking a sharp right turn and then crossing. So no one's going to do that. They're going to cut across. So that'll just encourage people with strollers to walk outside the crosswalk. The parallel parking space next to the entrance to the daycare has nothing to stop it from overlapping the crossing area. That should be a curb and bollards so that the head of the car or the tail of the car, I'm not really sure how you're parking there, doesn't overlap the crosswalk. The medical, gym, and daycare are still sandwiched or shared on the same floors. No security measures were provided to show how the adults in the medical office and gym will be separated from the children. We have a lot of really good examples of other cases where cameras, alarms, all these things were put on the staircases, and there was no effort to do that here. So that has to be done. We don't have security drawings. There's still no convenience stair for the medical office, which will, because I did a lot of medical offices back in the day of being an architect, will perforce result in convenience use of the fire stair that's shared by the daycare. So I'd like to know, again, how will the daycare floor access be prevented if you've got medical users using the fire stair all the time to get from this 3 floors of medical. And part of the reason is you never know how doctors rent these offices. Sometimes they rent the whole thing, sometimes they rent a floor and a half, sometimes they rent a space, and they'll run up and down the stairs to get to, they'll even have patients go up and down stairs. So I don't know if it's permitted for stair C to have no access at all to or from the second floor. It bypasses the second floor. It's a convenience stair, but there's no access. So I'm imagining in a fire, there you are, midway, there's a fire below you and you can't get out, right? It's not a fire stair, but all of a sudden there's a fire below you, right? So, or maybe even one above you, I don't know. I don't know if it's, that's fire department call. Stair C was added at our insistence to separate daycare and only goes to the 3rd floor, not the roof. That's the other thing. Again, convenience stairs have a different set of rules, but I don't know what. And with respect to fire department, also, at the last hearing, fire department objected to the play area on the roof of the 3rd floor and to both means of egress from the daycare exiting to the driveway. We don't still see both conditions, and we need fire department to respond. The applicant said fire department had already responded, but I don't think we got anything from that. There are also many environmental concerns, including noise, air quality, and hazmat. We have noise and air quality sign-off, although there is a comment about how the emissions from a nearby auto body facility were handled in the EAS. So I don't really know if that means they're supposed to modify the EAS, or is that just the consultant for future use, make sure you always do it like this. The DEP comments appeared unaware that a play area is proposed on the roof. Staff should verify with DEP that such use is acceptable. A Phase 2 was submitted on July 30th, so there hasn't been time for DEP to review it. DOT had extensive comments as of July 23rd based on the earlier layout, so I don't know whether the drawings and DOT's comments kind of got crossed in the mail. Note, however, sorry?
They're crossed.
They crossed in the mail.
So they're we're waiting, and they're going to send it again.
They're going to send, DOT's going to review.
Revised, but they're going to wait. We sent it to them, they're going to send new comments.
Okay. But the revised trip generation rates for all activities and their concerns about density of parking and overlap with daycare functions were in DOT's comments, and I don't think those were modified because it's they're using, what, maybe? No?
They got, they submitted like,
Who's they?
the applicant submitted a few days before the letter was issued.
Right, but what I want to note is that DOT commented on showing that they were using, the applicant was using the wrong trip generation rates for all the uses. And so I don't know whether, whether their revision picked that up in advance, right? Sorry. Yeah, and the revised EAS was submitted on July 17th. That's the reason that I'm saying it. I don't think they were aware that the trip gen rates are incorrect. And so they need to redo the EAS to reflect those trip gen rates.
They're going to, DOT, sorry, I'm just looking at the chain. DOT sent us an email, hold on, that said they were going to, they would like to review the revised EAS and issue a new set of comments.
Okay.
So a new seeker review request was sent to them.
Okay, all right, so it may still have the old wrong trip gen rates.
Yeah, and they may still have some comments the same,
Okay.
but
Okay.
because they received a letter a few days after they submitted.
Right.
Now they
wanna,
have
okay.
to review the new thing and see if all the comments still apply, or if they have new comments, et cetera.
I have a
Okay.
question. The trip gen rate analysis is being required because of the parking waiver?
No, it's, no, it's everything. It's always, we always look at, you know, it's DOT is doing the review, and in addition to which, we're concerned about the daycare. And-
No, I'm not,
right,
I'm just trying to
right.
understand what's triggering the trip gen. Is it the parking waiver?
No, they're just, that's how they do their transportation analysis.
Yeah. There's a lot of uses, so
Yeah.
they're also trying to decide, like, what are the impacts on intersections,
Yeah.
on levels of service. I mean, it's a seeker review. All of this is subject to seeker, right? So the seeker review.
No, I understand
right?
that. I think the only two uses that are not permitted as of right is the daycare and the PCE. Rest are all as of right uses.
But that doesn't mean that they
So-
don't look
But
at
they have,
the,
they have concerns about the site because of the high level of, like,
Service.
traffic
Yeah.
in the area, and there's something in seeker that gives them discretion to ask for information when they have concerns about site.
Okay.
yeah. That's our standard. Seeker review always looks at all of the uses in the building.
I was just gonna add that for the school as a standalone, separate, because the PC itself doesn't require a secret review. It's a joint review between the transportation divisions and child safety.
Right.
When child safety deferred it to traffic engineering.
Yeah.
That's what they did because of the daycare use.
Okay.
They're not actually going to issue a comment letter,
Who?
child safety.
Okay.
Because they deferred it. Daycares are not under their jurisdiction, but they want to make a case-by-case decision if they're going to review it or internally distribute it within their agency.
Oh, okay. Got it. Got it.
I have some comments. It was difficult for me to kind of keep it in the back of the mind. I mean, I had to keep it in the back of the mind. The parking waiver is not before us, and what is before us, the daycare and the PCE. And so I limited my comments only to the portion of the parking that is at grade and nothing that affects below grade. Anything of the building that is below grade in the cellar or anything related to parking below grade, I didn't look at that. I only looked at everything daycare from ground level up and how whatever parking circulation is happening at the ground level up, it's going to affect the daycare circulation. So I didn't look at anything below because the first part of the application is going to be withdrawn. So my questions are, So as I understand it, stair C is exclusively for the daycare. And it seems elevator B will be also used exclusively for daycare. If that's the case, would it be accessible from the cellar, second and fourth floor? Because the graphic shows that the doors will be opening on these. And if so, it should not be, or it should be more of like a key kind of restricted access. With regards to the parking operation, I had a lot of comments. That is, in regards to the, in addition to the sign provided, a crossing guard also during peak pickup and drop-off should be provided at that crosswalk area. Provide additional speed bumps for vehicular lanes to be used by vehicles to approach the crosswalk from the garage and from the street. This is to slow down the vehicles approaching the crosswalk. The proposed valet parking only and the daycare parking drop-off and pickup only sign that is proposed right at the entrance, I think can be confusing, and someone who's entering the, let's say, wanting to go to the ambulatory care facility wouldn't know that those drop-off and pickup at the grade level is only for that, and they may make that right turn after they enter to get to the drop-off pickup. So I think there has to be two separate signs that says drop-off for school this way, vehicular drop-off for all other uses, go straight kind of thing. Something that's much more visually that keys them in. And there should, and also shouldn't the sign say parking garage and daycare drop-off pickup? It says valet parking. I think that can actually scare some people off and say, oops, I don't want my car to be parked by valet, I'd rather park on the street. So I think you should just say parking and daycare parking. Those are the two distinctions here that should be drawn. And I would also say that they should, while the plan is showing there's some visual buffer that has been provided for that portion of the parking lot that is in the R2 district, I think the buffer has to be much more robust. It has to be much vertically higher. The reason I'm saying that is that when you're coming from Little Neck Parkway, if you see those drop-off vehicles, your mind is kind of drop-off vehicle parking spaces. You're thinking, okay, I'm going to make a right turn, and then I'm going to make a right turn and going to park in those drop-off things. But that's only for the school. Someone may not know that. So you want to completely visually buffer it. It serves two purposes. One, you're providing a beautiful visual buffer. And the second, it also prevents someone from assuming that that's a parking space for them who is coming for a non-daycare related use. And they should provide additional parking sign along the building for those 4 parking spaces that are along the, that are parallel parking spaces along the building. There is no signage there that says that those parking spaces are exclusive for the daycare facilities. So that should be provided 4 of them right against each one of them. And it should be posted on the wall saying drop-off pickup for daycare parking only. And those were the primary ones I had. Did I have any additional? No.
I had a question like you did about the site search finding. It just seems to me that looking at a map that takes in every single property in the as of right and then doing an analysis that says none of them are for sale or rent doesn't really satisfy the finding. The finding is supposed to actually look at available sites and then rule them out based on the fact that they don't suit your programmatic needs, not that you're just going to take a look at a map and highlight everything in the area, even if it's not even available.
Right.
I have nothing further.
Ready? Yeah. New cases?
Do we have the PCE?
There's
Oh,
number
I'm
18.
sorry. I thought you already pulled it. I'm sorry.
No.
Item number 18, 2018-145 BZ 2573, 25173 Jericho Turnpike, Queens.
This is the PCE. The plans show a parking layout at the first floor with parking spots depicted in orange. I don't know what that means. I certainly hope they're not thinking that those are PCE parking spots. And apparently, these are different architects working on the 2 projects, hence the disconnect. Plus, there are 3 spots located on the ramp that are not shown on the daycare application. And in any event, this floor plan, as with the plan at the last hearing, doesn't match the plan submitted for the daycare. So it's not the job of the other architect who doesn't know about the daycare project. It's the job of the applicant to coordinate these drawings and make sure they all say the same thing.
They are different applicants.
Oh, okay, well, so that's a problem. So the 2 different applicants need to get together, right? No, in other words, applicant as in one is Planet Fitness, but both are represented by the same council.
No, they're different
No?
council. This is
Different
Averman
council.
and
Yeah.
16 and 17 were Platinum.
Oh, okay, so they need to get together because they are not sharing data, and it's really a problem, because they're making assumptions about how to use that parking area that's not allowed. So, sorry, did you say one?
No.
Okay. And so we're waiting also for acoustical attenuation information and drawings, since the proposed, we talked about this the last time, since the PCE surrounds daycare and medical uses, so potentially very disturbing. Imagine you've got like 3-year-olds taking a nap, and then somebody like drops a pile of weights on the floor. We had asked for massage licenses, but that may not be available because it may not be open, hopefully. We do have DOI, we still need fire department, but fire department's working on the building in general. And we do have a floor area schedule that I didn't see in the statement of facts. So the floor schedule is total PCE area of 17,242 square feet, with 3,370 on the first floor and 13,872 on the second floor. And I don't know if that's gross, I don't know if that's gross or zoning. Okay, anybody else on this?
Roger, make a note, Planet Fitness don't do massages.
But they have massage areas.
Yeah, they have beauty angel rooms.
Yeah,
I think they were-
It's
they
just
had-
massage chairs or like
Yeah.
vibration, but they don't do massages.
Right, that's what they had stated at the last, that some kind of automated.
Thanks.
Ready?
Okay, yeah.
New cases, item number 1, 2018-193BZ, 1389 East 22nd Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community board recommends approval. On the threshold question of retaining 50% of the existing building's exterior walls on the exterior, they need to add the standard note to that effect. Also, they need to add to the calculations the total exterior wall linear footage. It looks, however, that an adequate amount of existing walls are being retained. They need to clarify whether the first floor joists are being raised. And then the side yard reduction is shy of the required 13-foot minimum total. It's shy by like 6 inches or something. Or maybe, yeah, something like that. The proposal is for a small rear yard incursion, 10-foot 5 by 12 feet for the kitchen, leaving all but 12 feet of the 40-foot wide rear yard with a complying rear yard. This personally is a most welcomed, modest request with respect to the rear yard waiver. They should indicate heights in NAVD 88 on the existing and proposed plans, which is, by the way, a standard required by the Department of Buildings to submit your drawings. At 35 feet, the building is tall as compared to the immediate neighbors, the tallest of which is 32 foot 8 inches. So they have to justify that height with respect to neighborhood character or lower the peak height to 33 feet. They need to show how the second floor addition at the front comports with neighborhood character. I think I saw other houses on the block that have sheer kind of front walls, but they need to have made that argument. They request 0.99 FAR. 9 houses in the study area have similar FARs, so that's justified. And I just have to say, I thought the drawings were very clear. It's a pleasure to read drawings that are really professionally done. And those were my comments. Anybody else?
I had one question, and that is the zoning analysis chart does not include the existing and the proposed open space ratio, which is stated in the statement of fact. I did not see a community board approval. Was it submitted later
Yeah.
on? Okay.
So it was existing and proposed OSR, right?
Yeah.
Community board, yeah, they recommended approval.
There's a reference in the response to notice of comments about a sandboard map being provided, but that hasn't been provided.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Okay, item number 2, 2019-20 BZ, 1933 East 14th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial hearing to officials, but I didn't find notice of hearing to officials and neighbors.
We have it, she submitted it over the weekend,
Over the weekend.
yes.
I'd like to, communicate to our applicant that it's not okay to submit these things over the weekend. They should be submitted upon their initial submission to the neighbors. Or, upon submitting notice of hearing to the people who are supposed to receive it, she has to submit it to us. We can't be getting it on the weekend, the day before, all of those things. It's not okay. Community board recommends approval with one opposed. For retention of 50% of the exterior walls on the exterior, oh, by the way, Daryl, can you forward that to me? Because I didn't see it. For retention of 50% of the exterior walls on the exterior, explain all floor plans and show the new construction on all exterior walls. Yeah, because I'm not finding it. So they should overlay the demolition calculation drawings on the proposed plans. They need to retain 50%, not 41%, on the second floor, and can't include walls located on the interior of the proposed building. Demolition drawings and proposed do not resemble each other. So you need to prove that the demolition will retain the 50%. Also explain beams at different heights as compared to existing and show how that is retention of existing beams, existing materials. Show elevations again in NAVD 88 on both existing and proposed. The only waivers requested are for rear yard incursion. FAR is less than the maximum of 1.25, and side yards comply. The first floor plan does not show the existing probably illegal closet in the front and side yard to be removed as described in the statement of facts. The 1929 Belcher Hyde map does not show that front extension into the side yard, hence it's most certainly illegal. So that section needs to be cut back to provide a complying side yard. The rear yard study shows existing rear yard is 35 feet, not 31'7" as indicated on the drawings. They need to provide a survey because now it's not clear what's the right answer. They need to provide justification for reduction in the rear yard to 24 feet at the second floor. The roof appears to be needlessly high, but according to street elevations, neighboring houses are high as well. They should provide a photo streetscape, which is always required and wasn't provided here. And I think that's it. Anybody else?
I know they made a submission on Friday. I did not have a chance to look through those. That may have addressed some of my comments,
Oh.
which were regarding to I think numbers were switched with regards to open space and lot coverage and those things.
Right, okay.
Ready?
Okay.
Ready, move on?
Yeah.
Item number 3,
You have
20.
one more time.
No, we have 3. Item number 3, 2019-81 BZ, 144 East 39th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board recommends approval with one abstention. We have one letter of objection from an immediate neighbor describing crowded conditions at the site and preferring residential use there. With respect to continuous use proof, they have Google Street photos from 2009, 12, 13, 14, 16, and 17, so there's a couple of gaps there. The Department of Finance assessment roles establish ownership, not use, so I'm not sure whether the board accepts that.
It establishes use.
It does?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, with building classes.
Okay.
But
Okay.
that doesn't necessarily establish the use of the
Continuous.
entire property.
Right.
It's the majority use of the building, and it doesn't say whether or not it's actually occupied.
Right.
Either.
Right,
That's-
okay. Or where they're occupied, okay. But they do have a phone directory.
Yes, they do.
That seems good, right?
Yes, yes.
Because you wouldn't pay for a phone if you're not home.
Right, yes,
Right,
and
right.
it's the sole tenant, there was never another tenant,
Right.
so. I mean, all in all, I figure all of it points to the
Yeah.
fact that they've been active.
Right. Okay. The only certificate of occupancy provided to us was from 1976, so no CO was ever obtained to reflect office use on the first and second floors, which are not the subject of this variance, but they still show use group 6 photo studio. So, yeah, so it's a long time where the C of O doesn't actually look like the picture. Department of Finance records, so this is my confusion about this application. Department of Finance records appear to indicate this is a not-for-profit, quote, benevolent use. And that statement of facts indicates that this is a not-for-profit, quote, educational charity with program and office space for the headquarters of ESU, which is the English language program. So I ask, isn't this instead a conforming use group 4 that doesn't need, that's given up its variance? So they purchased this site in 2001. That's the English-speaking Union of the United States purchased the site in 2001. Up until then, it was arguably, because of the variance, it was being used as an office on the 3rd floor, and the lower floors, photo studio, or who knows what, right? But now it's being occupied by a not-for-profit, and they say they have program space. So when the rule is not more than X% of your floor area can be used for offices, they may actually qualify as use group 4, non-offices. And that's my question. And I know that if you're in an area where both use group 4 and use group 6 is permitted, DOB lets you just pick whichever one you want, but that's different. This is a variance. So have they obviated the need for the variance?
Or abandoned?
Or abandoned, yeah. I don't know. And we don't have drawings of the layouts, or let's say specifics on which is program versus which is central office function, right? Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay.
So this concludes the executive section for August 6, 2019.
Problem. Thank you.